The ultimatum hit every band at once: kneel by count 0. The alien voice was fluted glass and static, promising benevolent custodianship after disarmament. In Luna Control, Commander Lin Tran didn't blink. "Protocol blackout," she said, and the stars went quiet. Lights dimmed. Networks died like a tide going out. Across the system, dead cargo shells rotated to face the enemy, heat sinks unfurled like black wings, and old rocks remembered they were shipyards. If the Aegis continuum expected a bow, they got the sound of safeties clicking off. The first Aegis spearhead translated in blue fire over Neptune, their shielded cruisers exhaling sanctimony and carrier drones like pollen. They broadcast patience, a final invitation to compliance, a dossier of acceptable governance templates. Lin muted the channel. On the tactical slab, Seoul was a nervous mosaic, civilian traffic scrubbed to a crawl, relays offline per blackout, and 100 decoy freighters pretending to panic while their ballast bays cradled tungsten dreams. "Confirm polar mass drivers," Lin said. Her voice was flat, the habit you use when everyone else needs a place to anchor. "Polar is cold," Okoi replied from her right. "And angry." In Ceres' shadow, the Lacuna yard stuttered awake. That had been the bet: 30 years of dual-use infrastructure spun as mining cooperatives and humanitarian envoys. The Aegis looked for forts: "We build foundries in asteroids, welders behind storefronts, and dry docks in the vacuum gaps of orbital slums. You can hide a fleet if you build it out of errands." The enemy cruisers advanced behind radiant ovoids. Their doctrine worshipped at the altar of energy advantage: latticed shields, beam lances, shimmering flak curtains. "We brought rocks." The slab plotted a parabolic rain of kinetic kill vehicles, each rod dumb as a nail and smarter than pride. Mass drivers thumped. The planet-scale magnets at the poles spat needles that would arrive an hour later, an honesty of physics you couldn't jam. "Neptune pickets," Lin said. "Wake the dead." Beyond Triton, a scatter of derelicts remembered their names. Habrex spat out skiffs with heat pumps strangled to whisper. Dead ice haulers bloomed with antennas and showed predatory profiles as ablative foam sloughed off. Peregrine slid from the dark side of an inert refinery, her skin drinking light. She was a stealth cruiser by budget, a community project by soul, panels borrowed from universities, a reactor donated by a decommissioned satellite farm, guns machined in 10,000 garage mills and vetted by standards committees that met in church basements. The first exchange was not a battle but a seminar. Aegis drones surged, luminous and precise. Our lasers flicked, not to kill but to nudge, shepherding them into volumes of space where we'd salted chaff and micromines. Energy flared, then the continuum learned a human proverb in the old language of siege engines. The rods arrived. Shields that were poetry against beams proved prose against momentum. They flexed, diffused, and failed with the steady logic of stress. One cruiser staggered as if surprised to be a thing with mass. Its captain tried to yaw, to spill force sideways, and swallowed a follow-up smaller darts that went looking for joints and radiators. In the control pit, the cheer was a held breath turned sound. Lin didn't cheer. "Keep it proportionate," she warned. "Target the hulls, spare the habitats." "Copy proportionate," Alvarez said at gunnery, his hands gentle on the archaic walnut grips he'd bolted to a modern board. Rituals matter. Aegis lances reached back, carving space with light. One beam kissed a decoy tug and peeled it open, a flower nobody asked for. Names scrolled in red, then stopped. The crew had ghosted to pods 5 minutes earlier per protocol. Blackout wasn't only silence, it was choreography. Cargo guilds became flotilla captains. Neighborhood councils became signal corps. We learned from Midway, deception nets, prepositioned surprises, the stubborn math of enough. Transit gate at Neptune is theirs, Okoye said. Then take away their map, Lynn answered. Rivera, cut their quantum backhaul. Dr. Rivera's hair was a halo of stress and triumph. Interposing the lacuna reflections, they said. We'll spoof the handshake and feed it noise. Aegis doctrine assumed the narrative was theirs to write. We erased the pen. Their command bursts went mushy, their formation began to breathe out of time, and in that arrhythmic gap humanity spoke. Not with a speech those come later, but with a rebuttal forged in welded hulls and household name volunteers. A Corvette squadron punched through the drone cloud, Peregrine stitched holes, and over Neptune a myth got its first crack. At count 0, they demanded we kneel. At T+29 minutes, we taught them how to fall without hitting civilians. The second wave tried to be clever. They skipped Neptune and came for the arteries, Mars cargo lanes, the L4 granaries, the ice trains from the Kuiper. Doctrine versus doctrine, except ours grew in alleys and union halls. We seeded the lanes with maintenance events that happened to stage tugboats at angles only sabotage would love. We rerouted civilian convoys through shadows where our gunboats could ghost alongside, hull to hull, painting protection onto commerce without a press release. Phobos reports refugees piling into caverns, Okoye said. They're pumping in air the color of courage. Keep the Phobos corridor dark, Lynn replied. If they can't see it, they can't shoot it. Aegis dropped a courier ship, a needle of ostentation with a shield bubble like stained glass, straight into the Mars-Earth transshipment zone. It pulsed a demand packet, expecting all nodes to bow and relay. Our relays were off. Our people were not. The kill box unfolded like origami. Civilian freighters with suspiciously precise ballast vents exhaled reflective dust, turning space into milk. Beneath that curtain, tugboats that had spent decades pretending to be weak kicked their mass drivers over clock. The courier's shield took the first hail with aristocratic disdain and the second with a stutter. The third was a boarding skiff shaped like a promise. Minimal casualties, Lynn said, and she meant it from the bones outward. She'd seen what empires call pacification and wanted no mirrors of it. Just war is a phrase that tastes like ash if you don't rinse it with discipline. Rivera whispered a prayer to the saints of encryption and cut the skiff's transmission window into the microseconds the Aegis lattice blinked to breathe. The boarders hit the hull with mag teeth, plasma saws tracing doors where none existed. Inside, they met soldiers who looked surprised to bleed. The fight was close and brutal and exactly as long as it needed to be. We took prisoners and, more important, we took a core that still hummed with a quantum link key. Back on Peregrine, the courier's captain stared at Lynn through a one-way pane that wasn't. He had the posture of a man who'd only ever attended victories. You will be catalogued, he said, through the intercom, voice stripped of its holy reverb. Your variance will be normalized. Lin toggled transmit. We prefer names to numbers, she said. Commander Tran. This is Sol. We don't kneel. She muted him and turned to Rivera. Can you ride their network? Rivera kissed the courier's core like a violinist checking wood grain. Give me a minute and an old rumor. We learned from Warsaw Radio how to be loud without being found, how to make the wrong people hear the right things. We learned from Dunkirk not that miracles happen, but that logistics is how you spell them. The courier's key sang open. Briefly, tastily, we were inside. Aegis comms were a cathedral of certainties. We graffitied it. Not with boasts, but with telemetry, the shield failures at Neptune, the civilian corridors we'd held open, the list of names of those we'd lost spoken aloud in 20 languages so their own officers had to hear the human cost. Psychological ops is not always lies, sometimes it's letting truth roam where propaganda forbids it. Picking up something weird, Okoye said. Non-Aegis traffic listening. Small. Slant inductor signature I don't recognize. The voice that came through was soft and full of teeth. We are the Illyri, it said. We were conscripts. We were told you were vermin. You are, not. Lin blinked. Copy Illyri. What do you need? Proof that the sky can be wrong, the voice said. And a lane out. In the Phobos caverns, kids painted stars on rock with recycled suit coolant. On the slab, the map of Sol's traffic looked like a circulatory system under stress but alive. We escorted the Illyri Corvette through the milk corridors and watched as its camouflage peeled into a pattern our sensors labeled friend with a question mark that felt like hope. The Aegis courier went quiet when he realized he was listening to defections. Blasphemy, he said, as if the word could erase realities. We'll return you to your people, Lin told him. Alive. You'll tell them we aren't vermin. You'll tell them we refuse you and spare you. See what that does to your certainty. The Mars lanes cleared. The count ticked forward. Above Ceres, another set of maintenance outages brought a new clutch of hulls to life, slender frigates with names like Common Purpose and Right to Repair, their insignias painted by children. Defense was holding. The next sentence wrote itself in Lin's head and burned like an oath. Defense is not the end. Blackout didn't mean mute forever, it meant we chose the music. We hijacked the Continuum's theater and changed the play. Rivera's patchwork an algorithm named Dove slipped into their quantum relays with the courier's stolen cadence. It didn't shout proclamations. It whispered seed truths into command cues, casualty ratios without the gloss, footage of Aegis beams carefully avoiding habitats because our ECM made them think those were ammunition ships, and cruel only to arrogance the moment a cruiser's shield sagged and a human tug spared it rather than scarring a hospital dome behind it. Make them argue with themselves, Lin said. No hero edits. Just, context. On the slab, the system expanded to include rooms we'd never been allowed in. We saw the Continuum's internal memos crackle with stress, doctrines questioned at margins, low-rank officers pausing before they hit send. A myth had been total. Now it had an asterisk. We fed the asterisk with care. The Illyri corvette's captain, she called herself Thrin, appeared on a side screen, all translucent cartilage and eyes like patient storms. "Your rocks did what our beams could not," she said. "We were trained to laugh at mass. We forgot we have it. We all forget we sink if we think we're pure light," Lynn answered, and surprised herself with the priest tone. "Stay under our umbrella while we figure out what to do next." "Umbrella? Old Earth thing," Okoye said. "When the sky betrays you, you bring your own." The Liberation Alliance began as a distribution list. Kitsurifers signed their names in chemical scents that our translators rendered into poetry. A labor guild from the Jovian Trojans added ships with patched skins and perfect engines. A Martian councilwoman with a chipped tooth offered fuel at cost and a swear jar for anyone who preened. You cannot schedule legitimacy, you earn it in the gray between broadcasts. Ethics walked beside tactics. Alvarez requested permission to test a captured beam array integrated into our emitter spine. "We can thread it through our kinetics, make their shield management misread our timing," he said. "But we need a live target." "Only if the target is shooting at a habitat," Lynn said. "We don't prove we're better by forgetting why." The test came early. An Aegis frigate attempted to curve a lance through a corridor we'd marked safe. Peregrine took the shot on her cold side, ice ablated, paint scorched. Everyone exhaled because the shell of the ship is a kind of myth too. "Return fire," Lynn said. Alvarez twinned the captured beam with a pulse of tungsten, the frequencies braided like a dare. The Aegis shield hiccuped, missile locating power, and the slug slipped through to amputate a gun mount without gutting the spine. The frigate spun, humiliated more than harmed. We sent a medical ping anyway, because mercy travels faster than propaganda if you give it a ride. Rivera pushed Doves further. "We can intercept quantum bursts before they crystallize," they said. "If we aim at their theater node in the Kepler corridor, we can stop their orders from sinking for hours." "Hours are an economy," Lynn murmured. "We can buy a lot with them." She convened the council, the makeshift parliament of captains, union leaders, and a philosopher who had once been a civil rights attorney until the law was replaced with policy. The plan that emerged was simple where it needed to be and baroque where the continuum sensors would look for sin. We would leave Sol not as evacuees but as hunters. We would strike the relay that told the Empire which way was forward. History is kind to those who seize initiative and kinder still to those who share it. Before they burned, they paused. On the hangar deck, kids from Ceres handed out patches they'd woven from old netting, a black armada of triangles flying against a sun. Lynn accepted hers and thought of Midway again, not the glory, but the deception net stretched by hands who didn't have medals in mind. She thought of Stoics and their clear-eyed demand to control only what you can. She thought of a word she had avoided because of how final it sounded: pursuit. "Set pursuit doctrine," she said into shipwide. "We're done only not losing." The Kepler corridor relay hung in a Lagrange cradle like a cathedral bell. It was beautiful in the way all infrastructure is when it believes its unassailable arches of superconductors, a whisper of charge that felt like weather, guardian pickets with shields tuned to ceremonial contempt. The Aegis named it Rectitude. We named our operation Borrowed Horizon because we would take the future for a little while and return it modified. Peregrine led a wedge of black-hulled ships whose paints drank starlight and emissivity curves mimicked the background hiss. Behind them, the graveyard fleet woke. That was the nickname for the biggest gamble of our deception, a constellation of decommissioned hulls we'd scattered through the belt, wired together by hidden foundries and patient labor. Their cores came online one by one, signatures smeared by river mud tricks we'd stolen from terrestrial resistance histories. What the Aegis had catalogued as scrap stretched and aligned into formation, old names taking new vows. Rectitude's theater note is that hub, Rivera said. Doves can ride the shadow of their own sink tick if we're on top of it when it breathes. Alvarez, Lynn said, we open with a proportionate hello. If they stand down, we take the node clean. If not, we teach physics, he said. The wedge slid under the picket's gaze. Doves licked the timing seam and slipped inside. For a heartbeat that tasted like lightning, the Continuum's command mesh forgot what step came next. Peregrine spoke in the borrowed cadence of a relay supervisor, maintenance rehearsal, hold fire. Half the pickets obeyed out of habit. The other half tried to shout, their packets collided with our lies and became silence. In that curated hush, our tugs kicked tungsten. The first volley wasn't lethal carbide darts that shaved sensor masts and traced warnings across shield skins. Stand down and live, Lynn broadcast, her face framed in the borrowed dignity of their channel. It mattered that she offered it. It mattered more that she meant it. Rectitude fired. The beam caught common purpose amidships. For a moment, every rivet on every ship remembered gravity. The frigate held together, because hope is sometimes just good engineering, but her spine buckled and her crew's names lit Lynn's board in red. There are doctrines, and there is the moment you decide which way to lean against history. Return fire, she said, and this time there was no qualifier. Kinetics stitched the relay's guard like a tailor with a grudge. Peregrine's captured emitter braided with Alvarez's slugs, forcing the shields to pant. Okoye rolled the ship in a surgeon's arc, giving the radiator fins a cold gulp of dark while the guns spoke. On the far flank, Thrin's Illyri corvette dove like a comet, her hull plates refracting our colors blue, red, purple, yellow, white bright as a stolen sunrise. The pickets tried to regroup, but their orders arrived as recipes for doubt. Rectitude's lattice glowed a furious white, dumping heat into sacrificial veins. We cut the veins with darts the size of broom handles. The relay's voice faltered. Alvarez cued the last volley fat rods that would not be gentle and Lynn lifted a hand. The lift costs seconds and maybe lives. Last chance, she said on wideband. We will not strike if you cut power and evacuate. An Aegis officer appeared, not a praetor, just someone with a job. His face was pale where theirs are usually lit with doctrine. We are authorized to prioritize equipment retention, he said, as if reciting something he now hated. Prioritize your people, Lynn said. We'll take the machine. Power indicators dipped. Not all the way. Enough. Fire on the spine, Lynn ordered. Cut, don't chatter. The rods arrived and translated into structural wisdom. Rectitude sagged. Its core went dark with a sigh like a story-changing tense. Escape pods sprayed. Our tugs moved before the speechwriters could, scooping up lifeboats with the same cranes we used for ore. Mercy is logistics too. In the aftermath, the Continuum's theater in the sector went blind for 8 hours. 8 hours is an empire's eternity. We spent them moving civilians, rewriting traffic, broadcasting what had happened with dates and coordinates so nobody could claim myth to be memory. The graveyard fleet fanned out to fall on supply lines, not cities. The Illyri sent 2 more corvettes. The Kitsu unfurled sails of exotic chemistry that made our sensors sing. A dozen small polities pinged the network with cautious hellos. Loss rolled in waves. Common purpose would never solo again. 3 names joined the scroll in the mess. An engineer whose jokes had been terrible and necessary didn't answer roll call. Victory tasted like iron. Lynn stood at the view blister and watched the relay's broken arches drift. "We didn't come to burn," she said quietly, "not to the crew but to the future. We came to teach." Behind her, the patch on her shoulder, black triangles against a sun, caught the light. Pursuit doctrine was set. The Black Armada wasn't a rumor anymore. Somewhere far, a praetor would wake to a report that read like blasphemy. Somewhere near, a child on Phobos would sleep under a ceiling painted with stars that were hers again, at least for tonight. We spent the Empire's 8 blind hours like misers turned philanthropists. Logistics caravans peeled off to feed hungry stations. Smugglers with Union badges became quartermasters. The graveyard fleet rippled into Aegis space in spearlets rather than one proud arrow. Thrin's Illyri corvette ranged ahead and sniffed the route to a spool yard the Continuum called the Vesper Spindle, a factory that wove jump-capable frames from exotic filaments and self-regarded as a monument to inevitability. We approached like weather. "Doves is inside their queue," Rivera said, eyes red and alight. "I can make their inspection beacons expect the wrong sunrise." "Then we will rise at a more useful hour," Lynn answered. "Okoi, chart a lane that threads the refugees around the fight." Under blackouts, discipline, war, and evacuation shared corridors without collisions. Kitsu reefers unfolded sails that bent sunlight into momentum, towing a refugee cylinder with the tenderness of a parent guiding a child across a street. Our gunboats slipped underneath, their matte skins indistinguishable from shadow. The Spindle asked us for credentials. We gave it a rehearsal schedule, stamped by its own signature. Inside its perimeter drifted an archive barge named Lexicon, not weapons, but doctrine, training sims, rules of engagement, propaganda scaffolds, culturally tuned myths. We could have slagged the barge and starved 1,000 indoctrination pipelines. Instead, we wrapped it in nets and kissed its hull with mag clamps. "Boarding teams, you're librarians today," Alvarez said, smiling like a man trying not to bleed worry. "Check the books out." The Spindle woke to the wrongness too late. Pickets pumped warning beams that wrote lines across dust and mist on purpose. Their sensors still believed half our hulls were maintenance ghosts. Our first salvo was legal in a way only physics can be, darts that shaved shield projectors and snipped thermal lines, not habitations. When a guard frigate tried to hide behind a worker ring, we refused the shot. Somebody, maybe Riverbone tired, maybe Brave, flashed their running lights in Morse and spelled "thank you." Lexicon secure, came over the net. Stacks intact. They index their sins. Rivera's teams cracked the barge with the respect you give a cathedral even when you disagree with the prayers. This is a doctrine engine, they breathed. They train certainty here. Then we will train doubts, Lin said. Copy the raw, tag redacted, leak with context. We remembered the Navajo code talkers, how a people turned language into armor. On a private band, diaspora tongues that the continuum never catalogued wove our commands, old Vietnamese lullabies mapped to vector lists, Yoruba market slang stood for timing codes, Dine structured the boarding rotations with the elegance of constellations. A machine cannot break what it has never seen. An Aegis prefect made the move we dreaded. He parked a gunship in front of a habitat cylinder and announced he would fire through civilians if we did not break off. His voice shook despite ceremony. The slab lit with heartbreak. Lynn closed her eyes, saw the map behind her eyelids, and remembered a civil rights case she'd read as a young officer. Power's favorite trick is to make you choose between evils it designs. Okoi, cut the tie lines, she said. Katsu, give me sail on that cylinder. Tugs, on my mark. Under our gun's cold umbrella, Katsu sails blossomed like stained glass, grabbed the habitat's thin sunlight, and began to tow. Tugs hit the spin couplers with the deftness of dock hands. The gunship tried to line up a punitive shot and discovered its arc was now a geometry problem with moving numbers. Alvarez put a slug across its nose that rang like a warning bell. The cylinder drifted free, its windows flashing with the white of faces pressed to glass. No one cheered. Work continued. With the hostage theater collapsed, the prefect blazed retreat. Thrin salted his path with tracer dust that turned his shields into a lantern for our missiles to avoid mercy even for enemies, because we wanted him alive enough to report the failure of spectacle. Meanwhile, Lexicon's contents flowered across captive Aegis channels, not gloating but minutes, policies, payout tables for collaborators, curricula that described non-compliant cultures as diseases to be normalized. Truth is flammable if it finds air. Signals from 3 minor polities, Rivera reported. Chiron Hydrofarms, the Vel Armory Co-ops, and a pilgrim ring from the Tauric Verge. They're asking if there's a lane out. Give them lanes, Lin said. Give them rules. And give them our promise, we don't leave people behind. Before we burned out, we set up a teaching channel, a stream that ran on the continuum's own frequencies and showed our targeting protocols, our mercy catches, our memorial roll, our refusals. The spindle watched as its trainees chat filled with questions not approved by the syllabus. We left it breathing, its machines humming, its workers' unions secretly richer by a line item labeled maintenance spares that were, in fact, their first unsupervised tools. War moved on. The Black Armada did not paint skulls on hulls, did not loot shrines, did not shoot escape pods. Our symbol stayed triangles against a sun, and our doctrine stayed the kind that could be explained to a child without flinching. Pursuit had begun. We intended to catch, but not to become what we chased. Praetor Serevin arrived like a correction. His flagship, Dogma, was a cathedral of angles behind a skin of ablative foam that looked like frost and behaved like a mathematician. Escorts Orizon and Cannon bristled with counter-kinetic sails, flexible vanes that bled momentum sideways and laughed at simple rods. The continuum had studied our homework and turned in a revised answer. They're fielding Whipple nests, Alvarez said, whistling. foam, ceramic, foam disposable armor. Our darts will mushroom and die polite. Then impoliteness, Lin replied. Split slugs. Pedal sabo. Cloud a path and braid beams through it. We slotted new tricks into old launchers. Each barbell round would arrive and flower into a shrapnel bouquet that forced shields to choose. Each pedal carried a trickle of captured emitter frequency to irritate lattice logic. Rivera tuned doves to ride Dogma's sermon channel, the network that infused orders with piety. Okoye shifted our vector into a plane Dogma's big guns could not sweep without flashing its radiators at our tugs. Thrin took the knife roll. The opening exchange felt like trying to write a poem while someone erased every other word. Their counterkinetics smeared our impacts into bruises, our braided beams made their shields pant but not fail. Then Cannon aimed a perfect lance at a convoy line the size of a city street and Lin stopped being polite. Peregrine, roll. Alvarez, paint that mount, she said. The captured beam braided again with tungsten. The lance emitter hiccuped, misreading its own feedback, and our petal bloom carved the turret away from its spine without popping the magazine. Cannon wobbled. Doves cut Serevin's sermon mid-syllable and replaced it with the quiet fact of his own shield's thermal load. His officers flinched at seeing their god sweat. We closed to knife range. Boarders rode skiffs under clouds of dust and prayer. The target was not Dogma's heart, too murderous for that, but its doctrine engine, a core that compiled theater-specific propaganda streams and synced them with logistics timetables. Take that, and you take away the story that makes obedience taste like duty. On the spine, Rivera's teams moved like burglars beneath incense smoke. They sliced hatches where none were drawn, pulsed the microlattice with counterfeit handshakes, and found the engine behind a wall that hummed in smug iambs. Inside, corrals for triumphal arrivals, shaming scripts for defectors, cartoons where dissidents had extra teeth. We took it whole, copied it into vacuum-hardened racks, and left a loop that would replay the preacher's own safety pauses whenever he tried to preach. Serevin reacted like a man watching a cathedral window break. Orizon dumped heat and dove, trying to belly flop us with tonnage. Okoye turned Peregrine sideways and lit off reaction jets that lifted us a meter metaphorically and kilometers literally. The escort slid past, carving open the night where our hull had been and catching a spray from our pedal cloud that turned its confident walk into a limp. In the mess later, the crew would call that move the stoop, because it felt like ducking under a thrown bottle and keeping your hands open. The moral fulcrum came when our hackers found Dogma's life support controls exposed through a protocol vanity. "We can vent their crew," a tech whispered, sounding afraid of how easy it was. "No," Lin said, and the word was a wall. Freeze order queues. Blind targeting. Disable magazines. If we can't win without murdering breath, we don't deserve to win. The fight lasted 7 minutes longer because of that choice. Common purpose, limping from rectitude, took a fresh wound and bled air that sparkled in the floodlights like snow. We plugged it with scrap and stubbornness. Dogma tried one last sermon. Doves replaced it with a recording from Lexicon, a training clip that defined humanity as vermin. Thrin piped it to wideband. The silence after sounded like shame. Serevin pulled back in good order, which is a phrase that hides how defeat feels. We kept his pods safe, catalogued them, treated burns, returned prisoners through lanes we announced ahead of time. On the decks, names were painted on bulkheads in the careful script of grief. Rivera set the doctrine engine on a bench and cracked it open like a seed. "We can turn this," they said softly. "Not to lie. To teach." "Then that's the next operation," Lin answered. "We don't just break their fleets. We break their need to kneel." The Continuum's capital precinct was not a planet but a halo, a chain of habitats and towers stitched around a soft bloom star, all lit as if staging permanence. At its heart hung the Auditorium of Accord, a megastructure that exhaled narrative into a million local theaters and braided obedience with calendar rhythms. Its guardians had names like Sanction and Mandate and war shields tuned to reflect glory. "We came not to sack a city but to seize a stage." "Mirror fleet is ready," Okoye said, fingers dancing. The mirror wasn't ships but skins, deployable reflectors on drones and lifeless hulks that returned radar and lidar like choirs, multiplied our signature to look like 3 times our number. In the belt behind us, hollow moons birthed the real second-wave hulls long prepared by foundries under soup kitchens and science fairs, painted by children who had grown up in gravity measured by ration lines. We announced ourselves on the auditorium's own wideband with the tone it used for parades. "Praetor Serevan," Lin said, steady and unamused. "You ordered us to kneel by count 0. We offer you terms by choice 1. His face filled a third of the sky, high-boned and tired. "You have no standing to negotiate," he replied. "Order does not bargain. Order that ignores consent is just choreography," Lin said. "Here are the terms. 1. Immediate withdrawal from self-governing polities. 2. Amnesty for defectors and clemency for those who lay down arms. 3. Return of cultural archives and reparations in the form of technical training, public health, and curriculum reform. 4. An end to the doctrine of kneeling. The Continuum will cease designing obedience as a virtue. 5. You seat junior officers at our schools for proportionality and consent, and we seat our cadets in your engineering halls so no one can pretend the other is a cartoon again. We will not rule you. We will teach alongside you or fight until we run out of names." He tried grandeur. "You presume a parody that does not exist." Behind Lin, mirror drones unfurled. In the halo's reflections, the Black Armada tripled and then uncoiled a further truth. The hollow moons at Vesta, Harmonia, and Sinope opened their mouths and a reserve fleet slid out, quiet as a pen leaving a pocket. We didn't lock targeting on the auditorium, we locked on the conduits that let it speak. "We can silence your theater without cutting your air," Lin said. "Watch." Alvarez fired a lacework of pedal rounds, each head programmed to shave transmission masts, spare hospitals, and leave the children's gardens lit. Captured emitters hummed a braid that made sanctions shields cough at the exact microsecond the rods arrived. Conduits parted like hair. The auditorium's light dimmed from commandment glow to plain civic wattage. In 1,000 apartments, dinner kept cooking. In 1,000 offices, the holy reverb in the PA died, and you could hear the room again. We pushed the doctrine engine we'd stolen into the opened veins of the Capitol's network, but with our edits. Not lies, not gloating, but history, the training clip that called us vermin, contrasted with footage of our tugs scooping pods, a soldier on dogma, bandaged, drinking water from a human hand, a list of our dead read in that same human's accent, coordinates and timestamps for every action we'd claimed, so auditors could check. And interspersed, a curriculum, just war principles in 10 languages, the Midway deception nets explained in a paragraph a child could draw, civil rights organizing as logistics, not magic. Local chatter spiking, Rivera murmured. Pretor's own officers are asking if the Neil Doctrine is, still doctrine. Serevin's eyes flicked towards something off-screen advisors, law, memory. You force me to choose between legitimacy and survival, he said. You're welcome, Lynn replied. Choose legitimacy. Survive by it? The Halo's defense grid woke, then hesitated, then woke. Mandate angled its guns. Thrin rolled her Corvette and flashed our colors along her hull like a dare. The mirror fleet flexed again, behind it, the real reserve took up positions that made corridors for evacuation even here, even now. We sent a packet listing prisoners we would return and assets we would not destroy. We sent the exact power curve that would keep the auditorium warm but voiceless. We sent the schedule for our next broadcast and invited the Continuum citizens to call in with questions. That last bit made Serevin laugh, a broken sound. You cannot open a line to the governed, he said. They will ask for things. Good, Lynn said. Maybe they'll ask for you too. If you decide to be worth it. The halo hung in a new quiet. The myth that had taught reflexive kneeling stubbed its toe on the floor of reality and had to sit down. We held a weapon we had refused to use to kill and used it to teach. The terms hung in the air like an offered hand, not a cuff. Serevin didn't sign a surrender. He issued a directive with bureaucratic teeth and trembling edges, operational de-escalation with external instruction partners. The Continuum would withdraw from named polities, stand down the Neil Doctrine pending review, and accept teaching teams on its own ships. It wasn't poetry. It didn't need to be. Dates and routes attached. We mirrored them to the sector and watched traffic change color. The first convoy under the new directive was ugly and perfect. Aegis transports escorted by our tugs moved a wave of refugees back to the Chiron hydro farms, an Illyri medical frigate docked with an Aegis cruiser to trade vaccines for repair specs, an old Jovian Union tug towed common purpose to a yard where kids had chalked a welcome on bulkheads. On the hull of Dogma, welders from both sides carved access doors for classroom modules. It looked like defeat if you squinted. It was a win that would take generations to count. We paid what we owed. Memorial rolls were read in messes and markets. A corner of the Phobos caverns became a garden of names, a hydroculture rack replanted with rosemary and millet, each stalk labeled in careful hands. Okoye taught a workshop titled How to Stand in a Doorway When Light Becomes a Weapon. Rivera set doves to peacetime fact-checking, rumor wrangling, teaching kids how to smell a doctored clip. Alvarez limped through his gunnery checks with a new respect for foam and an old respect for forgiveness. Thrin accepted a patch with the triangles and the sun and pinned it beside a Gishmark braid from the Illyri coast where she had learned to sail before conscription had called it navigation. We owe you a sea, she said. You owe us neighbors, Lynn answered. Bring your arguments, your flavors, your stubbornness. Bring your children's science fairs and your grandmother's recipes. Empires hate that mix. We returned Rectitude's lifeboats with full rations and a packet of our targeting doctrine, annotated like a cookbook: when to hold fire, when to accept risk, when to anchor a convoy with your body. The Continuum's response was formal and strange. They sent back a set of safety seals for our mass drivers, stamped with a symbol that had once meant control and now wobbled toward cooperation. The teaching mandate became real. Cohorts of junior officers arrived with crisp uniforms and faces that learned to loosen. Our cadets stepped into Aegis labs and asked impertinent questions about beam harmonics and were, sometimes, answered. Not all uprisings freed themselves cleanly. On the Vel Armory co-ops, a collaborator faction tried to burn out a union hall. We sent boats, not bombs, and parked them like bouncers. On a pilgrim ring, a preacher declared our non-rule a trick and demanded the old certainties. We invited him to the auditorium, handed him a mic, and let him argue. He left with a schedule for volunteer duty and a grudging smile. Democracy is slower than command. We chose slow. At the edge of the halo, Serevin asked for a meeting without cameras. They floated in a room with white walls and no incense. He looked like a human, which was the point. You shattered my story, he said. We showed it seems, Lin replied. Your people will stitch their own now. Help them. He stared at his hands. You could have burned the auditorium. We still can, Lin said, because honesty is part of trust. We won't if you keep your word. He nodded, which is not the same as kneeling. Teach us proportionality, he said. Teach me how to order mercy without making my captains think me weak. It's logistics, Lin said, smiling a little. It's Midway deception nets and Dunkirk ferries and Warsaw radios and courts where people argued until the law cracked enough to let light in. It's checklists and sermons and knowing when to shut up and let a citizen speak. It's boring until it isn't, and then it's everything. After, she walked alone along a corridor where the halo's star painted her in gold. She touched the patch on her sleeve. The triangles were still black, the sun still bright. Pursuit doctrine had brought them here. Stewardship would keep them from falling in love with the chase. Back at Phobos, kids slept under a ceiling still painted with reclaimed stars. In the mornings, they learned how to plot a transfer orbit and how to say no without having to shout. In the afternoons, they planted herbs in tubes and asked why the enemy's beams had looked like rain. At night, sometimes, the old broadcasts flickered in by habit, and Dove sent them a gentler program: history with sources, science with labs, ethics with jokes. We didn't build a throne. We built schools and shipyards that sang the same song: be hard to kill, easy to live with. The Black Armada became less a fleet than a habit of mind: hidden foundries when needed, open councils when possible, kinetic where shields demand it, careful where life suggests it. We kept a list of names for when we failed and a longer list of promises for when we would again be tempted to become what we had beaten. Status? Lin asked, standing in Peregrine's dim bridge as a new day rotated into view over the seam of rock. Transit lanes green, Okoye said. Refugee flow easing. Serevin sent another cohort. Thrin wants to argue about curriculum standards and the relative ethics of pedal sabo. Good, Lin said, and Saturday let them argue. Make room. Outside, Vesta's hidden yards exhaled just enough heat to blur a star for a second and then remembered patience. In quiet bays, ships that looked like errands slept. In loud halls, children painted triangles against a sun and drew, in thick strokes, a fleet that had taught an empire to stand without making everyone else kneel.